Yes, guys, the Calabar Talk Show with Dave and soon a David Trace expression. Congratulations to the Tierra SSG, the Chief of Staff, the Chief Press Secretary, and to every other person that's been appointed by His Excellency Prince Basio too. Season of Sweetness is actually here. Let's talk about five things. Five things you have to know, five things you have to understand when you intend to learn how to drive or when you go to a driving school. These five things will actually tell you if you're in the proper place, that's if you're in a good driving school, and if the manner of instruction is actually world class. Number one, search for an approved driving school on Google. It's this simple. If you're in Cross River State, if you search for driving schools in Cross River State, you will find approved driving schools in Cross River State from Google. So if you're in Lagos, you search for approved driving schools in Lagos, you will find approved driving schools in Lagos. That's the first thing. Actually getting to know if the driving school that you've seen or the one you've seen on Google is approved, it means you have to find it there under the list of being approved by the government. Now, let me give you a clue of something. In Calabar, where I'm based, I can tell you three driving schools are the best: Heritage Driving School, Ace Driving School, and Deep Concept Driving School. Of course, I'm going to give you the tip. So, if you want the best services for driving schools, you can go to any of those three. And I have no relationship with any of those driving schools. Number two, the physical space of this driving school, how it looks like in the inside, how the car looks like, and how the learning environment actually looks like. There's nothing like if you use a Beetle to teach me how to drive and a car that is actually not in good shape, if you use that to learn how to drive, it means you're going to be a good driver. That's actually nonsense. When you use a Beetle to learn how to drive in 2023, there's a big difference between the way a Beetle mechanism works for modern day cars. You have even the engine behind. So you actually don't have to drive a Beetle. Even the clutch and accelerator paddles don't actually move in the manner of modern day cars. So that's absurd. You get when the car is unnecessarily bad, that's not a good driving school. If the environment is not conducive, there's no fan, there's no AC, there's no ventilation, that's unnecessarily bad. So the physical presence of the driving school, the car, and the driving school will tell you if the environment you are in is actually a proper place. The third thing there is a dummy. Is it going to be an electrical kind of simulator dummy or a manual dummy? In the manual dummy settings, you actually have your gearbox and your gear selector. You have a steering wheel in front of you. You have a clutch, a brake, and accelerator in front of you. And they actually teach you how to select, count up, count down your gear, how to clutch, how to accelerate, how to brake, how to keep your hand in the 10 to 2 or the 10 quarter to 3 steering holding pattern. You learn all that on the dummy. And you can also learn that same thing in the electronic simulator where you actually virtually see what you're doing and the car is actually moving like a game-based simulator. So you can actually do that for a manual and actually do that for automatic. But majority of the simulators in driving schools are actually automatic simulators, but they are actually manual game-based simulators. But whatever the case is, at least there should be a simulator because the simulator actually makes life easier for the instructor and actually makes life very easy for the student because this is your first introduction of knowing how to drive without actually sitting down inside a vehicle. So you learn how to manage your accelerator, your clutch, your braking system. You learn how to make left and right turns in a game-based, process. Of course, you actually see yourself driving, and you learn how to drive from there. So by the time you get into the car and you're actually being asked to do this and do this and do that, it's easy. Don't forget, in aviation, majority of the whole thing, of the whole work is done firstly in the simulator before they actually take real flight testing. The fourth thing I'd like to bring to you is how are you being taught how to drive? There's this thing I find, and it's quite very funny. If you ever learn how to drive from a field, like an open field, you will never be a good driver because you'll be very much complacent of space management. And that's one very technical part about driving that is very important. A lot of persons that have driven for 10, 15, 20 years are not very conversant with space and lane management. They tend to go to other people's spaces or other road users. Now, are you being taught how to drive from the onset in the dual carriageway or in the field? I'm not there to answer that. You should be asking yourself. If you're saying that you're being taught how to learn how to drive on the field, something is actually wrong. If you're being taken to a dual carriage road that will allow you to learn the lane markings and road markings, you know where the cap is, you know the slow lane, you know um, um, the continuous breakable lines, you know the speed lane. When you are taken to a dual carriage road, you will understand far, far better what it means to manage a dual carriage road. If you're taken to a field, trust me, you will never understand what it means to use a dual carriage road, even when you forcefully start using dual carriageways and other types of roads. The last thing I like to bring to you is your instructor actually teaching you how to drive defensively? And that brings us to this. What is defensive driving? This is simply you anticipating, you know, to make sure that you drive defensively, you're anticipating problems to make sure that you drive defensively. For instance, there's going to be danger behind the car and, of course, danger in front of the car. So, which means you can actually hit someone from behind and someone can hit you from behind. And this takes us to where you talk about your rear mirror, your side mirrors. This talks about your braking sense, your accelerating sense. It talks about you anticipating, giving a gap of up to 50 meters, of which another vehicle can actually fit in front of you before the other vehicle in front of you. But just in case that man actually steps on his brake unnecessarily, you won't be close enough to have an impact. This is the process of defensive driving in a nutshell. Defensive driving also constitutes you knowing how to do basic, maintenance tip, understanding the process of checking, WFT, water, oil, fan, and tire. Basic maintenance also, is a defensive driving tip. And in the driving school where you don't have an engineering table, I don't get it. You learn how to drive without knowing how to change tires. You learn how to drive without actually knowing basic components of the vehicle. You learn how to drive without actually understanding, basic maintenance tips, names of components of your engine, and which fluid goes into which. You don't know how to drive defensively, because driving defensively also entails you being able to understand your vehicle to an extent where you can tell your technician or your mechanic that this is the fault I'm seeing. Go straight check this. You should be able to know when your braking pedal or your brake pedal is now getting lower before it becomes active than when it's normal. And the common issue for that could simply mean your brake pads are getting lower because they actually wear and tear. You should actually understand what it means for checking engine light to be on, understand what it means for maintenance required, and all these things. You should know that if you learn how to drive defensively, because driving this defensively is not actually just being defensive by avoiding collision with any other road user, but actually reducing costs and maintenance costs, and actually avoiding unnecessary costs in the future by actually making those maintenance processes now. Is part of the whole process of defensive driving. So if you go to driving school where you don't have an engineering table, I don't think that's a driving school, because you should be able to change your tire. You should even be able to understand how to change your oil. If you cannot change it, you should understand how it works. You should understand which fluid goes into which component. You understand where the hydraulic goes into. You understand where your foam water goes into. You should understand where your fluid for your radiator goes into. You should understand that. And that is, the circle of learning how to drive defensively. Ladies and gentlemen, the Calabar Talk Show with Dave and Sue and the David O'Tree's expression, real life practical advice and profounding solutions.